Jake Morrison wiped the grease from his hands and checked the clock on the garage wall. It was almost 8 in the evening, and the summer heat still pressed down on Denver like a heavy blanket. He had been working on old cars all day at his uncle's repair shop, trying to earn enough money for next semester's tuition. At 18 years old, his biggest concerns were passing his business classes at community college and maybe asking out the girl who worked at the coffee shop near campus. He locked up the shop and walked toward his beat-up truck in the parking lot. The sky was turning purple and orange as the sun dropped behind the mountains. Jake was thinking about dinner, maybe some leftover pizza, when he noticed something strange. The air around him began to shimmer and hum with a sound he had never heard before. Then the ship appeared. It descended from the sky without warning, silent except for that strange humming noise. The vessel was sleek and silver, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change in the fading light. It was about the size of a small house, and it landed in the middle of the parking lot with barely a whisper. Jake stood frozen, his keys dangling from his hand, unable to process what he was seeing. A door opened in the side of the ship, and a ramp extended to the ground. What emerged from that door would change Jake's life forever. She was massive, standing, at least 7 feet tall, with skin the color of deep red wine. She had 4 arms, each one corded with muscle that spoke of incredible strength. Her eyes glowed like molten gold, and they fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him want to run. She wore armor that looked both ceremonial and functional, decorated with symbols and medals he could not understand. Behind her came several other aliens, shorter and less imposing, carrying devices and wearing formal robes. Jake wanted to run. He wanted to scream, but his legs would not move. The tall alien woman approached him with steps that seemed both graceful and threatening. She stopped a few feet away and looked down at him. When she spoke, her voice was deep and rich, and she spoke perfect English with an accent he could not place. "You are Jake Morrison, grandson of Daniel Morrison." Jake managed to nod. His mouth was too dry to speak. One of the smaller aliens stepped forward, holding a device that projected images into the air. The alien spoke in a high, formal voice. "I am Ambassador Kelvin of the Valorian Diplomatic Corps. We come bearing news of great importance regarding a legal matter." Jake found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What kind of legal matter?" The ambassador began to explain, and with each word, Jake felt his normal life slipping further away. His grandfather, Daniel Morrison, had apparently encountered aliens 20 years ago. It had been kept secret from the public, a first contact situation that governments had hidden. During that encounter, Daniel had saved the life of a Valorian noble named Lord Tavish. To repay this life debt, Lord Tavish had arranged a marriage contract. His daughter would be bound to Daniel's male heir. The contract was written in galactic law, a legal system that spanned hundreds of worlds and thousands of civilizations. It could not be broken without severe consequences. Daniel had died 6 months ago. Jake remembered the funeral, the sadness, the way his grandmother had cried. He had loved his grandfather, but the old man had never mentioned anything about aliens or contracts or life debts. Now the contract had passed to Jake. The tall alien woman spoke again, and there was anger in her voice like distant thunder. "I am Fleet Commander Lyra Vex, daughter of Lord Tavish. I am your legal spouse under galactic law." Jake stared at her. "My what?" "Your wife," she said, and the word came out like a curse. "Bound to you by my father's foolish sense of honor, trapped by ancient customs and legal chains I cannot break." The ambassador continued, explaining in that formal voice. The marriage had to be completed within 1 Earth year. They had to live together. They had to consummate the union according to Valorian tradition. If they failed to do so, there would be consequences. War between the Valorian Empire and humanity's young colonies was a real possibility. Millions could die. Jake felt like the ground was tilting under his feet. "I'm 18 years old. I work at my uncle's garage. I go to community college. There has to be some mistake." "There is no mistake," Lyra Vex said coldly. "The contract is valid. Your genetic markers match the Morrison family line. You are the heir, but I don't want to get married." Jake's voice rose despite his fear. "Especially not to someone I just met. Someone who isn't even human." Lyra Vex's golden eyes flashed with anger. "You think I want this? I am 215 years old by your counting. I have commanded fleets across a dozen star systems. I have fought in wars that would break your fragile human mind. I have turned down marriage proposals from the most powerful families in the galaxy. And now I am bound to a child who smells of motor oil and whose greatest achievement is repairing primitive combustion engines." The insult stung, but Jake was too overwhelmed to respond properly. The ambassador stepped between them, his small hands raised in a placating gesture. Please, both of you. This situation is difficult for everyone involved, but the law is clear, and the consequences of failure are severe. We have arranged accommodation, where you will both live for the duration of the contract period. Fleet Commander Lyra Vex will remain on Earth. You will learn about each other's cultures. You will find a way to make this work, and if we refuse, Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. The ambassador's expression grew grave. Then war becomes likely. Your people are new to the galactic community. You have colonies on 3 worlds. The Valorian Empire spans hundreds of systems. A conflict would be devastating for humanity. We cannot allow personal feelings to override the safety of billions. Jake felt the weight of those billions pressing down on him. He looked at Lyra Vex and saw that she felt it too. Her 4 hands were clenched into fists, but her face showed resignation beneath the anger. When do we start? Jake asked quietly. Immediately, the ambassador replied. Your belongings will be transported to your new residence. Your family will be informed. The human government has already been briefed and has agreed to cooperate. This is happening, Mr. Morrison, whether you wish it or not. Jake looked up at Lyra Vex again. She was staring at the mountains in the distance, her glowing eyes fixed on something far away. Maybe she was thinking of her fleet, her crew, the life she had been forced to abandon. Maybe she was thinking of how to escape this trap they were both caught in. I did not ask for this, she said without looking at him. Neither did I, Jake replied. The ambassador gestured toward the ship. Please, both of you. We have much to discuss and arrangements to finalize. Your new life together begins tonight. As Jake walked toward the alien vessel, leaving his truck and his normal life behind in that parking lot, he could not shake one terrible thought. This was real. This was happening, and there was no way out that would not end in disaster for everyone he had ever known. Lyra Vex walked beside him, her footsteps heavy with fury and resignation. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? They were prisoners of duty and law, bound together against their will, responsible for preventing a war neither of them wanted. Jake Morrison had woken up that morning as a normal kid with normal problems. Now he was married to an alien warrior who hated him, and the fate of humanity rested on making that marriage work. He wondered if he would wake up and find this was all a nightmare. But deep down, he knew better. This was his life now, and somehow he had to find a way to survive it. The house sat in the mountains outside Denver, far from the city lights and prying eyes. It was large and modern, built with a combination of human and alien technology that made it suitable for both species. The Valorian diplomatic corps had arranged everything with efficiency that bordered on cold indifference. They did not care that Jake and Lyra Vex despised this situation. They only cared that the contract would be fulfilled. Jake stood in the main living area looking around at his new prison. Large windows showed the forest and mountains beyond. The furniture was a strange mix of human and alien design. Some chairs had 4 armrests for life. Others were normal for Jake. The kitchen had 2 separate food preparation areas. One section glowed with alien technology he did not understand. Lyra Vex walked through the house with sharp, angry movements. Her forearms swung at her sides as she inspected each room. She did not speak to Jake. She had barely spoken to him during the flight to the house in a smaller Valorian transport. Her silence was heavy with resentment. The bedrooms are upstairs, one of the diplomatic assistants said in a cheerful voice that felt wrong given the situation. You each have your own space, though eventually you will need to share according to the contract requirements. I will not be sleeping near him, Lyra Vex said flatly. I will take the garage. The assistant looked uncomfortable. Fleet Commander, that is not appropriate for someone of your rank and status. Lyra Vex turned her glowing eyes on the assistant. I have slept in battle cruisers during combat situations. I have camped on hostile worlds in armor for weeks at a time. A garage is luxury compared to many places I have rested. I will take the garage. Nobody argued with her. Jake certainly was not going to. He carried his few belongings to one of the upstairs bedrooms and closed the door. He sat on the bed and put his head in his hands. This could not be real. This could not be his life now. His phone buzzed. Text messages from his friends asking where he was. Missed calls from his mother. The human government had promised to explain things to his family, but Jake knew that conversation would be difficult. How do you explain to your mother that you are now married to an alien warrior and cannot come home? He sent a simple text to his mum saying he was okay and would call her tomorrow. He could not handle that conversation tonight. The first week was terrible. Lyra Vex set up the garage like a military barracks. She brought in Valorian equipment, weapons that hummed with energy, training devices that moved in ways that seemed impossible. She woke before dawn and trained for hours. Jake could hear the sounds of combat through the walls, the sharp cracks and thuds of strikes against training dummies. They were required to eat dinner together every night. The diplomatic observers insisted on it. They watched from cameras hidden throughout the house, making sure Jake and Lyra Vex were following the minimum requirements of the contract. So every evening at 7, they sat at the large dining table in awkward silence. Lyra Vex ate Valorian military rations that came in sealed packages. They smelled strange to Jake, like metal and spices he did not recognize. She ate with efficient movements, refueling her body rather than enjoying food. Jake made simple meals for himself, sandwiches or pasta, things he knew how to cook. He tried to make conversation at first. So, what's your homeworld like? Lyra Vex looked at him with those burning gold eyes. You would not understand. I could try. No, you could not. Another night he asked about her military service. She set down her eating utensil with a sharp click against the table. I do not discuss classified military operations with civilians, especially not primitive ones who have barely left their own star system. Jake felt his temper rise. I'm not trying to steal military secrets. I'm just trying to have a conversation. We are strangers bound by a contract neither of us wants. Conversation changes nothing. We're stuck here for a year. We might as well try to get along. Lyra Vex stood up, her full height making her tower over him even from across the table. I do not want to get along. I want to be back with my fleet. I want to be doing my duty instead of being trapped on this backward planet with a boy who thinks politeness will fix everything. She left the table and returned to the garage. Jake sat alone, his appetite gone. The days blended together. Jake tried to maintain some normalcy. He enrolled in online classes for the full semester since he could not attend campus anymore. The government was paying for everything, a small compensation for his sacrifice. He studied business management and tried not to think about the alien warrior living in his garage. Lyra Vex maintained her routine of brutal training. Sometimes, Jake watched from the window as she moved through combat forms in the yard. She was incredible, moving all 4 arms in perfect coordination, striking with speed and power that seemed impossible. Her fighting style was like watching a violent dance, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. He noticed she spent hours staring at a holographic display that showed star maps and what looked like military reports. Her face during those times showed a pain that went beyond physical injury. She was homesick, he realized, not for a planet, but for her purpose. She was a warrior without a war, a commander without a fleet. Everything changed when Jake's younger sister came to visit. The government had allowed immediate family to be briefed on the situation. Jake's mother had taken it badly, threatening to sue the government, the aliens, anyone she could think of. His father had been quieter but equally upset. But Amy, his 15-year-old sister, had been fascinated rather than frightened. She showed up at the house on a Saturday morning with permission from the diplomatic corps. Jake was relieved to see a familiar face. They hugged, and for a moment, he felt almost normal again. So where is she? Amy asked, looking around with wide eyes. In the garage, probably training. Amy walked right to the garage door and knocked. Jake wanted to stop her but did not move fast enough. The door opened, and Lyra Vex stood there in training clothes, all 4 arms visible, her red skin gleaming with sweat from exercise. Amy looked up at her without any fear. Wow, you're really tall. I'm Amy, Jake's sister. Can I watch you train? Lyra Vex stared down at the girl, clearly surprised by the direct approach. This is not entertainment, I know, but I've never seen real alien combat techniques before. Please, I'll be quiet. Something shifted in Lyra Vex's expression. Maybe it was Amy's genuine interest, or maybe she was just tired of everyone treating her like a monster. Very well, but do not touch anything. Some of these weapons could kill you instantly. Amy followed Lyra Vex into the garage, and Jake came along, curious despite himself. He watched as Lyra Vex demonstrated various combat techniques, explaining them in response to Amy's questions. His sister asked about everything. What were those weapons called? How did Valorian warriors train? What was it like to fight in space? Lyra Vex answered each question with patience Jake had not seen from her before. She seemed almost relaxed, talking about something she clearly loved. She described battles among asteroid fields, boarding actions on enemy ships, the complexity of 3-dimensional combat in zero gravity. Have you ever been scared? Amy asked. Lyra Vex paused in her demonstration. Many times. Fear is natural. Courage is not the absence of fear but the ability to function despite it. That's really cool, Amy said. Jake gets scared of spiders. I do not, Jake protested, but he was smiling. Lyra Vex looked at him, and for just a moment there was something other than anger in her eyes. Not quite warmth, but not hostility either. Just acknowledgement that he was a person, not just an obstacle in her life. Amy stayed for several hours, and during that time, the house felt different. Less like a prison and more like a strange new kind of home. When she finally had to leave, she hugged both Jake and, surprisingly, Lyra Vex, "You're pretty awesome," Amy told the tall alien. "I hope you guys figure this out." After Amy left, Jake and Lyra Vex stood in the living room. The silence was less hostile than before. "Your sister is brave," Lyra Vex said quietly. "Yeah, she doesn't really understand danger the way she should. That is not what I meant. She is brave because she sees me as a person, not a monster. That takes courage in its own way." Jake nodded. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're a monster." Lyra Vex looked at him for a long moment. "I know you did not choose this situation any more than I did. No, but we're both stuck in it. Yes, we are both prisoners here." She went back to the garage, but something had changed. That night at dinner, when Jake asked about Valorian food traditions, she actually answered. The conversation was brief and awkward, but it was a conversation. It was a start. Jake lay in bed that night thinking about the look in Lyra Vex's eyes when she talked about her fleet, about the life she had lost. He thought about Amy's fearlessness and honest curiosity. Maybe there was a way through this that did not involve them hating each other for an entire year. Maybe they could find a way to be allies, if not friends. Maybe they could survive this together instead of separately. It was a small hope, but it was better than no hope at all. 3 months into their forced cohabitation, the diplomatic observers suggested that Jake and Lyra Vex engage in shared activities. The suggestion came with thinly veiled pressure. They needed to demonstrate progress toward fulfilling the contract, or the consequences would begin escalating. Jake suspected this meant political pressure on both Earth's government and the Valorian Empire. Lyra Vex responded to this suggestion with cold fury, but she also recognized reality. She proposed teaching Jake basic Valorian combat techniques. At least that way, she said, he would not be completely helpless if danger arose. Jake suspected her real motivation was having something to do that felt productive, but he agreed anyway. The training began the next morning. Lyra Vex stood in the yard behind the house, all 4 arms crossed, looking down at Jake with barely concealed skepticism. "Humans are fragile," she said bluntly. "Your bones break easily. Your muscles are weak compared to most species in the galaxy. You tire quickly. This will be difficult." "I'm tougher than I look," Jake replied, trying to sound confident. "We will see." The first session was brutal. Lyra Vex started with basic conditioning exercises that she said Valorian children learned. Jake discovered that what Valorian children found simple was agonizing for him. Push-ups where Lyra Vex added weight to his back, running drills where she expected him to maintain speeds that left him gasping, balance exercises that made his legs shake after minutes. He refused to quit. Every time he thought about stopping, he saw the disappointment that would flicker across Lyra Vex's face. She expected him to fail, expected humans to be as weak as she believed, so he pushed through the pain and kept going. After 2 hours, he collapsed on the grass, his muscles screaming. Lyra Vex stood over him, not even breathing hard from her own exercises. "You lasted longer than I expected," she said. Coming from her, it felt like high praise. Over the following weeks, the training sessions became routine. Jake's body adapted slowly. He got stronger, faster, more coordinated. Lyra Vex adjusted the difficulty constantly, always pushing him just beyond what he thought he could handle. But she also began teaching him actual techniques. Valorian combat was complex and strategic. With 4 arms, their fighting style involves simultaneous attacks and defenses that seemed impossible to counter. But Lyra Vex broke it down into principles Jake could understand. Positioning, timing, leverage. She showed him how a smaller, weaker opponent could defeat a stronger one through better strategy. "Combat is like a conversation," she explained one afternoon while demonstrating a defensive technique. "Your opponent makes a statement with their attack. You respond with your defense. The one who better understands the language of violence wins the exchange." Jake found he had an aptitude for the strategic aspects. Even if his body could not match Lyra Vex's physical capabilities, he began to anticipate her movements, to recognize patterns in how she attacked. Sometimes he managed to execute a counter that actually surprised her. "Good," she said after he successfully evaded a complex 4-armed strike sequence. "You are learning to think instead of just reacting." In return for the training, Jake insisted on showing Lyra Vex parts of Earth culture she had dismissed as primitive. She resisted at first, but the diplomatic observers encouraged it. Cultural exchange, they called it. Jake took her hiking in the Rocky Mountains. She moved through the forest with the ease of someone who had trained in countless environments. But he noticed her pause occasionally to look at things, the way sunlight filtered through pine trees, a deer that watched them from a distance, a view of snow-capped peaks against blue sky. "Your planet is very green," she said as they stopped near a mountain stream. "Most inhabited worlds have been developed extensively. Nature exists and preserves, not openly like this." "Do you miss your homeworld?" Jake asked. Lyra Vex was quiet for a moment. "I have not been there in 50 Earth years. My home is my ship, my crew. Or it was." The pain in her voice was clear. Jake did not push further. He also introduced her to human music. "The Valorian Empire had music," she explained, "but most of it was synthetic, created by computers to mathematical specifications of beauty. Human music, created by actual hands-on physical instruments, was considered primitive, but when Jake played her a recording of classical guitar, she listened in silence. He watched her face, trying to read the alien expressions. When the piece ended, she asked to hear it again. "It is imperfect," she said after the third listening. "The timing varies slightly. There are small errors in the notes. That's what makes it human," Jake replied. "Perfect is boring. The imperfections show that a real person made it, put feeling into it." Lyra Vex seemed to consider this. Late that night, Jake heard music playing softly from the garage. She was listening to the guitar pieces he had shared. Jake continued his online classes, working toward his business degree. Lyra Vex found this confusing and said so one evening at dinner. "You are legally bound to the Valorian Empire now," she said. "As my spouse, you have access to resources that could make you wealthy by Earth's standards. You could live comfortably without working. Why waste time on primitive human education?" Jake set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Because I want to build something of my own. I want to earn my achievements, not have them handed to me because of who I married." Something flickered in Lyra Vex's golden eyes. "That is a sentiment I understand better than you might think." She told him about her own career then, really told him for the first time, how being the daughter of a noble had made every achievement suspect, how other officers assumed her rank was purchased through family influence rather than earned through merit, how she had spent decades proving herself in ways that common soldiers never had to. "I have fought twice as hard for half the recognition," she said. Her forehands clenched. "Always there are whispers that I did not truly earn my position. It has made me harder than I needed to be, perhaps, but it was necessary." Jake nodded. "I think I understand. You had to be perfect because anything less would be used against you." "Yes, exactly that." They talked late into the night, longer than they ever had before. Lyra Vex told him about battles she had fought, not with the clinical distance she had used before, but with real feeling. She talked about the crew members she had lost, the weight of command, the loneliness of making decisions that determined whether people lived or died. Jake shared his own fears and insecurities, how he felt inadequate compared to his father, who ran a successful business, how he worried he would never amount to anything significant, how this entire situation made him feel like a fraud, a kid playing at being important while the adults handled real decisions. "You handled this situation with more grace than many warriors I have served with," Lyra Vex said quietly. "That requires a different kind of strength, one I am beginning to respect." The breakthrough came during the 4th month when news reached them from the Valorian fleet. Lyra Vex's former command had been ambushed by a hostile faction in a distant star system. The casualties were heavy. Her replacement commander had made tactical errors that Lyra Vex never would have allowed. She received the report in a holographic transmission and went silent. For 3 days, she did not speak to anyone. She trained with a violence that seemed directed at herself. Jake heard things breaking in the garage, heard sounds that might have been crying but from an alien throat that made the sounds, strange and frightening. He researched Valorian memorial customs. Using the Diplomatic Corps database he had been given access to, he learned about the naming of the fallen, a ceremony where the dead were honored by speaking their names and deeds aloud. On the 3rd night, Jake set up a space in the yard according to the instructions he had found. He lit ceremonial markers, played traditional Valorian memorial music from speakers. When Lyra Vex emerged from the garage, drawn by the sounds, she found Jake standing in the ceremonial space. "I thought you might want to honor them properly," he said. "I know I don't understand all the traditions, but I try to do it right." Lyra Vex stood frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, she walked to the ceremonial space. She began to speak in her own language, her voice deep and formal. She spoke name after name, each one followed by descriptions Jake could not understand but felt the weight of. These were people she had commanded, people who had died because she was not there. The ceremony lasted an hour. When it ended, Lyra Vex stood in silence, all four arms hanging at her sides. Jake approached carefully. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. She looked down at him, and her golden eyes were wet. He had not known Valorians could cry. "You honored them," she said, her voice rough. "You did not have to do this. You do not know them. You do not understand what they meant. But you tried to show respect in the only way you could. They mattered to you," Jake replied. "That makes them worth honoring." Lyra Vex reached out with one of her four hands and placed it on his shoulder. The gesture was gentle, despite her strength. "Thank you, Jake Morrison." It was the first time she had said his name with something other than contempt or cold formality. It was the first time she had touched him with kindness. That night, they did not eat in silence. They talked as something approaching equals, sharing stories, and finding common ground in unexpected places. 2 months remained before the contract deadline when the pressure from both governments became unbearable. Diplomatic observers were no longer subtle in their reminders. War, they said repeatedly, was not just possible but likely if Jake and Lyra Vex failed to consummate the marriage according to Valorian law. They needed to complete the bond, make it official in every way that mattered to galactic legal systems. Jake felt the weight of billions of lives pressing down on him every day. He saw the same weight in Lyra Vex's eyes when she thought he was not looking. They had built something genuine between them, something that felt real and valuable. But how much of that was true feeling, and how much was just two prisoners trying to make the best of a terrible situation? The question kept Jake awake at night. He began researching galactic law with an intensity that surprised him. He reached out to sympathetic Valorian lawyers through the diplomatic corps, asking questions that probably raised red flags in security reports. He studied the contract that bound him and Lyra Vex together, looking for anything that might offer a way out. What he found changed everything. There was a clause buried deep in the ancient legal framework that governed life debts and marriage contracts. If both parties formally rejected the contract and accepted full legal consequences as individuals, the marriage could be dissolved. It would not pass the responsibility to their families or governments. Instead, Jake and Lyra Vex themselves would bear the entire burden. The consequences were severe. They would both be exiled from their respective societies. Jake would lose his citizenship on Earth and in the human colonies. Lyra Vex would be stripped of her military rank and honors, banned from Valorian space. They would become legal outcasts, people without nations or homes. But it would prevent the war. Neither Earth nor the Valorian Empire could be held responsible. If two individuals chose personal exile rather than fulfilling a contract, Jake spent 3 days verifying this information with every legal expert who would talk to him. The answer was always the same. Yes, it was possible. Yes, it would work. Yes, it would destroy both their lives. He finally brought the information to Lyra Vex on a quiet evening. They sat on the deck watching the stars, something they did often now. He explained what he had found, showing her the legal documents on a tablet. Lyra Vex read through everything in silence. Her four hands were completely still, her glowing eyes fixed on the screen. When she finished, she set the tablet down carefully. "You have been researching a way to free us both," she said quietly. "Yes. This would cost you everything, your home, your family, your future on Earth." "It would cost you more," Jake replied. "Your entire military career, 2 centuries of service, your honor in the eyes of your people, and yet you present this option as though it is a gift." Jake turned to look at her. "I present it as a choice. We have not had many of those." Lyra Vex stood and walked to the edge of the deck, looking out at the mountains. "What would you do if we chose this path? Where would you go? I don't know. There are independent colonies, places on the edge of civilized space where outcasts can survive. It would be hard, but we would be free." "We," Lyra Vex repeated. "You say we as though we would remain together even after dissolving the marriage." Jake felt his heart beating fast. This was the question that mattered, the one he had been afraid to ask himself. "I guess that depends on what you want." Lyra turned to face him, and her expression was complex, showing emotions he was still learning to read on an alien face. "If there was no contract," she said slowly, "no legal obligation, no threat of war, would you want me to stay?" The question hung in the air between them. Jake thought about the past 8 months. The anger and resentment at the beginning, the slow development of respect, the conversations that stretched late into the night, the way his heart jumped when he heard her laugh, a rare sound but beautiful when it happened. The way she looked at him now, not with contempt but with something warmer. "Yes," he said, and his voice was steady. "I would want you to stay." Lyra Vex walked back to him. All four of her arms moved in small, uncertain gestures that showed how much this moment meant to her. "I have spent 200 years preparing for the wrong things," she said. "I thought fulfillment came from rank and military glory and the respect of my peers. I achieved all of that, and it was never enough. I was always chasing the next battle, the next promotion, the next proof that I had earned my place." She sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her alien body. "But here, with you, I have felt something different. You see me as a person, not as a warrior or a noble's daughter or a legal obligation. You value my thoughts, you listen when I speak, you respect my skills without being intimidated by them. You have tried to understand me even when I made it difficult, even when I was cruel to you." "You weren't cruel," Jake said. "You were angry. There's a difference." "I was both," Lyra Vex corrected gently. "But you forgave me anyway. You chose to see the best in me when I was showing you the worst." She reached out and took his hand in one of hers, her grip careful despite her strength. "I do not know if what I feel is love. I have never felt it before, so I have nothing to compare it to. But I know that the thought of leaving you, of never seeing you again, causes me pain. Physical pain." Here, she placed another hand over the center of her chest, where Jake assumed her heart was located. "I feel the same way," Jake admitted. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't want it at first. But somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my life." They sat in silence for a moment, holding hands and looking at the stars. Those same stars that separated their two worlds, that represented the vast gulf between their species. And yet here they were, finding connection across impossible distances. "So what do we do?" Lyra Vex asked. "Do we take your escape option, accept exile, and build a new life somewhere in the outer colonies?" Jake squeezed her hand gently. "Or we fulfill the contract. But we do it because we choose to, not because we have to. We make it real, make it ours." Lyra Vex looked at him with those golden eyes that had once seemed so alien and now seemed beautiful. "You would bind yourself to me permanently. Knowing what I am, knowing the complications that would bring." "I'm already bound to you," Jake said. "The contract did that, but I want to choose it too. I want to make a promise that means something beyond legal requirements." "What kind of promise?" Jake thought carefully before speaking. "I promise to face whatever comes next together with you. I promise to respect who you are and where you come from. I promise to keep choosing you, every day, regardless of what any contract says." Lyra Vex's eyes were bright, and Jake realized she was crying again. "That is a promise I can make as well," she said softly. "I choose you, Jake Morrison. Not because my father made a contract, not because galactic law binds us, but because you have shown me something I did not know existed. A partnership based on mutual respect and genuine care." "So we do this?" Jake asked. "We complete the contract, but on our terms." "Yes, we complete it because we want to, not because we must." They began planning the ceremony that would officially seal their marriage under both Valorian and human law, but they did it differently than anyone expected. They rewrote the traditional vows, creating promises that reflected their actual relationship rather than ancient customs. They invited people who mattered to them, not just diplomatic officials and political figures. Jake's family attended, his mother crying despite her continued concerns, his father looking proud and worried at the same time. Amy was a bridesmaid, wearing a dress that combined human and Valorian design elements. She could not stop smiling. Lyra Vex's military colleagues came in full dress uniform, their expressions skeptical but respectful. They had expected their commander to be humiliated by this marriage. Instead, they saw her standing tall and proud, choosing this path with her eyes open. The ceremony took place in the mountains outside, the house where Jake and Lyra Vex had learned to live together. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that seemed to bridge Earth and alien worlds. Representatives from both governments attended, relieved that the contract would be fulfilled and war avoided. But Jake and Lyra Vex barely noticed the political implications. They stood facing each other, his hands in two of hers, and spoke the vows they had written together. "I promise to choose you every day," Jake said, his voice clear and strong. "I promise to honor your strength without fearing it. I promise to build a life with you that respects both our worlds." "I promise to see you as my equal," Lyra Vex replied. "I promise to value your different strengths and perspectives. I promise to face the unknown beside you, not as a prisoner of duty but as a willing partner." When they sealed the vows according to Valorian tradition, which involved a complex touching of foreheads and hands, Jake felt something shift inside him. This was real now, not because a contract said so, but because they had chosen it. The celebration afterward mixed human and Valorian customs in ways that sometimes worked and sometimes did not, but everyone seemed to enjoy the attempt. Amy danced with Valorian officers who tried to learn human dance styles with their forearms. 6 months had passed since that night in the parking lot when Jake's normal life had ended. The mountain house no longer felt like a prison. Lyra Vex had moved out of the garage and into one of the upstairs bedrooms. They ate meals together without diplomatic observers forcing them. They trained every morning, talked every evening, and had settled into a routine that felt almost natural. Jake noticed small changes in himself. He was stronger now, his body lean and muscled from months of Valorian combat training. He moved with more confidence, more awareness of his surroundings. His online classes were going well, but he found himself thinking less about business management and more about the complex interplay between human and alien cultures. Lyra Vex had changed too, though her changes were harder to see. She smiled occasionally now, usually when Jake said something she found unexpectedly clever. She had started asking questions about Earth culture instead of dismissing it outright. She had even begun eating some human food, trying small portions of what Jake cooked. The diplomatic observers noted all of this in their reports. Progress, they called it, movement toward fulfilling the contract requirements. But Jake and Lyra Vex did not talk about the contract anymore. They talked about other things: books, military strategy, the philosophical differences between species, the nature of duty and honor. In Valorian culture, Lyra Vex explained one evening while they watched the sunset from the deck. Honor is tied to action. You are what you do, not what you say or feel. Intentions matter less than results. That sounds harsh, Jake said. Perhaps, but it is honest. Your human culture seems obsessed with feelings and intentions. You forgive terrible actions if someone meant well. We do not understand this. Maybe it's because we're short-lived compared to you, Jake suggested. We don't have centuries to prove ourselves through actions. We have to judge people on who they're trying to be, not just what they've achieved. Lyra Vex considered this an interesting perspective, though it seems it would lead to much disappointment when people fail to live up to their stated intentions. It does, Jake admitted, but it also allows for forgiveness and growth. People can change, can they? Lyra Vex looked at him with those golden eyes. I have lived 2 centuries and seen very little true change in people. They are what they are. Then how do you explain us? Jake asked. 6 months ago, you hated me. Now we're sitting here watching the sunset together. Lyra Vex was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps I was wrong about some things. It was as close to an apology as she had ever given, and Jake recognized it as such. The peace they had built was shattered on a Tuesday evening when everything went wrong at once. Jake and Lyra Vex had gone into Denver for a diplomatic event at the Valorian embassy. It was a formal dinner, the kind of thing the observers insisted they attend to show a united front. Jake wore a suit that felt uncomfortable after months of training clothes. Lyra Vex wore ceremonial armor that made her look even more imposing than usual. They were driving back to the mountain house in the vehicle provided by the diplomatic corps when the attack came. The first sign was the car in front of them swerving suddenly. Then the explosion, not large, but loud and bright in the darkness. Their vehicle's security systems engaged immediately, reinforcing the windows and doors. The driver, a human security agent, accelerated hard. Anti-Halian extremists, the driver said tersely. We have 3 vehicles pursuing. Hold on. More explosions blossomed on the road behind them. Small charges, Jake realized, meant to slow them down rather than kill. These attackers wanted to capture or make a statement, not just destroy. Lyra Vex moved with frightening speed. She pulled weapons from hidden compartments in her armor, devices that hummed with energy. How well armored is this vehicle? It will hold against small arms fire, the driver replied. But if they have anything heavier, we need to get off the road. A vehicle pulled alongside them, and Jake saw figures in masks, raising weapons. Lyra Vex rolled down the window and everything happened too fast for Jake to fully process. She leaned out with 2 of her forearms and fired. The pursuing vehicle swerved and fell back, smoke rising from its engine. There are civilians on this road, Lyra Vex said, her voice sharp and focused. Driver, take the next exit. We will deal with them away from innocents. They left the highway and headed into an industrial area. The pursuing vehicles followed. Lyra Vex was already moving, checking weapons. Her entire demeanor transformed. This was what she was trained for, what she had done for 2 centuries. Jake saw the warrior she truly was, not the frustrated prisoner he had been living with. The driver pulled into an empty warehouse lot and stopped. Stay in the vehicle, he ordered. But Lyra Vex was already out, moving with speed that seemed impossible for something her size. Jake watched through the reinforced windows as she engaged the attackers. There were 6 of them, armed with weapons that looked military grade. They did not stand a chance. Lyra Vex moved like violence-made flesh, for arms working in perfect coordination, striking and defending simultaneously. She disarmed the first attacker in seconds, broke the weapon of the second, and had the third on the ground before the others could react. It was not a fight. It was a demonstration of the vast gap between human combat training and Valorian warrior skill. Within 2 minutes, all 6 attackers were on the ground, disarmed and restrained. Lyra Vex stood over them, not even breathing hard. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Already alerted by the security systems, she turned and looked at the vehicle, at Jake watching from inside. Then she did something that made his chest tight. She moved back to the vehicle and positioned herself between it and the attackers, protecting him, shielding him with her own body even though the threat was already neutralized. When the police arrived and secured the scene, Jake got out of the vehicle. Lyra Vex immediately moved close to him, one hand resting on his shoulder. "Are you injured?" she asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice. "No, I'm fine. Are you okay?" "I am unharmed." These were amateurs playing at Revolution. She looked down at him, her golden eyes intense. "You stayed in the vehicle as ordered. That was wise. I wouldn't have been any help out there anyway," Jake said, trying to make it sound like a joke. Lyra Vex's expression softened slightly. "You are not trained for this kind of combat. There is no shame in recognizing your limitations." They gave statements to the police and were eventually cleared to return home. The drive back was quiet. Jake kept replaying the attack in his mind, the speed and precision with which Lyra Vex had moved, the way she had protected him without hesitation when they reached the house. Jake expected Lyra Vex to go back to her routine, to treat the attack as just another mission completed. Instead, she followed him into the living room. "I need to say something," she began, and her voice was less certain than usual. "I positioned myself to protect you during the attack. I did not think about it. I simply acted." "I noticed," Jake said quietly. "Thank you. You do not understand. I am bound by contract to keep you safe." "Yes, but that was not why I did it. I protected you because the thought of you being harmed was unacceptable to me. Not because of duty or law, but because I did not want you hurt." Jake felt his heart beating faster. "Lyra, what are you saying?" She looked away, all 4 hands clenched. "I am saying that somewhere in these past months, you have become more than an obligation. You have become someone I value, someone whose well-being matters to me beyond legal requirements. I do not know when this happened, but I cannot deny it any longer." Jake stood and walked closer to her. Even with his increased height from months of training, she still towered over him, but he did not feel small. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "I look forward to our conversations. I respect your strength and your mind. I care about what happens to you." This stopped being just about the contract a long time ago. Lyra Vex finally looked at him again. "This is complicated. We are different species. We come from different worlds. The power imbalance between us is enormous. I am 200 years old, and you are barely an adult by human standards." "I know," Jake said, "but we're already bound together. Maybe we can choose to make something good out of that, instead of just enduring it." "You would choose this?" Lyra Vex asked, and there was vulnerability in her voice Jake had never heard before. "You would choose me, if there was no contract forcing it?" Jake thought about the question seriously. He thought about the past 6 months, the training sessions and conversations, the way Lyra Vex had honored his small attempts at understanding her culture, the way she had protected him without thought for herself. "Yes," he said simply. "I would choose you." Lyra Vex reached out with one of her hands and very gently touched his face. Her skin was warm, her touch surprisingly careful given her strength. "Then perhaps we have found something unexpected in this forced situation," she said quietly. "Something that neither of us planned for or wanted, but that exists nonetheless." They stood together in the quiet house, 2 beings from different worlds who had been thrown together by circumstances beyond their control. They had fought it, resented it, and finally accepted it. Now they were choosing something more.